Hello and welcome to Newspeak, the New Culture Forum's look at the weekly news events. As you've probably already noticed, I'm not Peter Whittle, I'm Amy Gallagher. I'm going to be standing in for Peter while he's away on a short break, but not to worry, he'll be back with us soon enough. And we are joined by our brilliant commentators, Philip Kiszely, cultural historian and Senior Fellow of New Culture Forum, Rafe Heydel-Mankoo, Royal Historian and Senior Fellow of New Culture Forum. And we're also joined today by Harrison Pitt, host of the D Programme podcast and of the European Conservative. Just before we begin, I want to draw people's attention to our new Heresies documentary coming out tomorrow at 10 a.m. It's titled Britain's Silent Rape Explosion. Here's the trailer.
In 2013, there were over 16,000 incidents of reported rapes in the United Kingdom. By 2022, this increased to over 69,000, less than a decade on, more than a 400% increase. This harrowing trend echoes throughout Western Europe, from Finland to Denmark, Sweden, Germany and France. But why?
Grooming gangs that I would call rape gangs. Tell me about them. How many of those have we got?
To avoid any misunderstanding, can she define what she means by that?
The only evidence was that published on the situation in similar European nations. Yet days before going to edit, something remarkable happened. We finally got data.
So that's our Heresies documentary, Britain's Silent Rape Explosion. I actually had the privilege of working behind the scenes on that. It's an extremely powerful piece presented by Alex Phillips of Talk TV and not one to be missed. So do check that out. And just before we begin as well, I want Rafe to talk about our locals events coming up.
Yes, so our locals events have been coming thick and fast since we started in the new year. And we still have a few left for February. These events are all free of charge, and they're a chance for you to meet people from your local community who share your own views, socialise, hear from great speakers occasionally, and essentially form another sort of community in your local area. So the schedule is on Thursday, February the 13th in Lincoln. We'll have an event with Craig Marshall from the SDP. On the 16th of February in Norwich, there'll be an event taking place. That's a Sunday in the afternoon. Monday the 17th will be in Reading. On Wednesday the 19th in Brighton, there'll be an event with the gentleman on my Dexter, Harrison Pitt, and that will be followed on the 20th of February in Beaconsfield with Dr. David Starkey. Then on the 22nd of February, I'm afraid to say that our 12 noon pub lunch is now at capacity, so we can't take any more, but don't give up, because if you're in South London, we have a new South London chapter, and they'll be getting together on the evening of Thursday, February the 27th. So if you want to come to any of those events, please send an email to locals@newcultureforum.org.uk. That's locals@newcultureforum.org.uk.
Thank you, Rafe. So regular viewers of the show will know that here we've been looking at Islamophobia definitions and laws for quite some time. But this week we've heard that Angela Rayner wants to put up a plan for a council looking at Islamophobia. Philip, do you want to tell us more about this?
Yeah, so this is very frightening indeed, because this is a straightforward attack on free speech, and it is a de facto blasphemy law, really. It takes the 2018 definition, which was put together by an all-party parliamentary committee, which the Labour Party use as their understanding and definition of Islamophobia. And it says, Islamophobia, I'm reading here, Islamophobia is rooted in racism and is a type of racism that targets expressions of Muslimness or perceived Muslimness. So this is so broad, and it's linked to race. Of course, Islam is a religion and an ideology. It's nothing to do with race, really. But by teaming it with race, it makes it an absolute bogey. You are not allowed to say anything. And I mean, there are other things as well. The fact that Angela Rayner, of all people, is in charge of this just fills me with dread personally. And there are also other, there are key Muslim figures, not least Khalid Mahmood, who's a Labour MP, who's saying, look, this is ridiculous. This will just encourage extremist religious fundamentalists and will stop any kind of debate. Not only will it make other people unsafe, it'll make vulnerable people in that Muslim community, if you want to call it that, unsafe as well. So it's bad all round. And of course, it's just harvesting votes. It's trying to secure the Muslim vote, and in doing so, putting everybody else at risk, really, because once this freedom of expression, this fundamental freedom that we have, and we have to be able to challenge and ridicule ideologies and religion. Once that goes, we cannot get it back. And if we are dealing with sectors of this particular community who are extremely violent and who are extreme by definition, then we really do have major problems. I'm incredibly concerned about it.
Yeah, I mean, what worries me about this is the timing of it as well, and that we've had all this kind of recent media focus on the grooming gangs. We've obviously had the Southport trial. There's been a kind of raising of consciousness about Islam and about its dangers. And I wonder, Rafe, do you think that the timing of this is deliberate by the Labour Party?
Well, we know why the timing is happening as it is. Well, firstly, they had pledged to do this before, but Labour is reeling in shock from the collapse of its Muslim vote. And of course, the story, as big as the rise of reform, you could say, is the fact, of course, that you have 5 Muslim vote MPs elected at the last election. One of the justifications for mass immigration from the Labour Party's perspective was by flooding the nation with ethnic minorities, 80% of whom vote for the Labour Party. They would guarantee themselves a new demographic and secure majorities well into the future. Well, of course, they've now invited in the very elements that are undermining their ability to actually form majority governments in the future. They're scared about this. Of course, many Muslims deserted the Labour Party over the Labour Party's support for Israel and over Gaza. And so they're desperate now to try to redress that balance. And as anyone does when they're desperate, there's great fear that they're going to tip the balance overwhelmingly in a negative direction. And that's why I think we can be so concerned about them adopting the most broad definition possible in order to appease and placate not only Islamists, but the Muslim population more broadly. And let's be clear here, Islamophobia is not racist. Islam is not a race. Christianity is not a race. And when you say this, people on the left say, but most Muslims in the world are non-white, therefore it's racist, which is absolute nonsense. Most Catholics in the world are not white. Is it racist to attack Catholicism? Most communists are Chinese. Is it racist to attack communism? It's a fundamental right of all of us to criticize an ideology and any religious system. That's very different from anti-Muslim hatred, hating individual Muslims, which is abhorrent, but no ideology should be free from this. Also, we need to completely abandon the term Islamophobia altogether. This is an insidious term that was created by the Muslim Brotherhood, an anti-Semitic, racist, violent, extremist organization that supported Adolf Hitler, and they deliberately created Islamophobia as a term in order to suppress legitimate criticism of Islam through the politics of victimhood. That needs to be fully understood. It was popularized, you could say naively, or maybe not naively, by Trevor Phillips and the Runnymede Trust in this country, and even Trevor Phillips has now regretted that, saying that it's being used far too often as a cudgel to silence any opposition. And, also let's be quite clear here. Anything called the Islamophobia Council is actually a blasphemy council. That's what we're dealing with. Any attempt to suppress free speech on the issue of Islam, which includes criticism of Muhammad, criticism of Islamic beliefs, is a blasphemy law by the back door. And what that means, if this comes into being, is that we could potentially be restricted from speaking about cousin marriage, about child marriage, about forced marriage, even about grooming gangs or polygamy, or even wearing the burqa or the hijab.
And the actual term Islamophobia closes down the posing of actual legitimate questions. And probably the legitimate question is, why are people frightened? of Islam, because people are frightened of Islam. Okay, Islamophobia, fair enough. But why? What's going on? What's happening to make people frightened of Islam? And this council will address everything apart from the key questions. So it's insidious. And it's
and not just legitimate questions, but demonstrable facts as well. I mean, not least facts, because I think the vagueness of the definition is what, I mean, I regard these sorts of laws as insidious in and of themselves. The definition could be conceptually watertight for all I care, and I would still be against it because it's a straightforward attack, as Philip says, on freedom of speech. But the nebulousness of the definition gives magistrates and complainants and other people very wide purview indeed, and they could go out because it says rooted in racism and attacks on perceived Muslimness. One of Trevor Phillips's, again, he should always by his own petard for popularizing this term in our country. One of the facts that came out from one of his Channel 4 documentaries, I think about 7 or 8 years ago, was that 53% of Muslims in this country, it's probably higher now, 53% of Muslims in this country would want to make homosexuality illegal if they could. And like Trevor Phillips has unearthed all sorts of polling facts on this. Those would all of a sudden risk landing people in the dock if they were to report on them. Another thing as well, on Deprogrammed about, well, while Southport was flaring up and there were protests and riots across this country, we actually had Toby Young on the show because we thought it was a very topical moment to have that. And he made a very interesting point, which viewers might want to ponder. And I hope the Labour Party aren't watching in a way, because I don't want to give them any kind of advice so far as tactics and strategy are concerned, but it would be cleverer for the Labour Party here not to pass an actual law, which could be attacked as a blasphemy law, but just to update the guidance that is currently issued to magistrates,
which changes the culture,
in the judiciary. So, for example, and this is why it being rooted in racism is a real problem, because Toby Young said this is what he thinks they're going to do, and so we'll see whether Toby Young or Lord Young, as he now is vindicated on that. He thinks that they will basically issue this definition to lower magistrates, so that when they are considering cases like the recent burning of the Quran in Manchester, it's conspicuous that that individual was arrested on an incitement to racial hatred charge. Given that Quran is not as Rafe has remarked upon, Islam is not a race, but if it is described to magistrates as being rooted in racism or attacks on perceived Muslimness, then all of a sudden that guy could be banged up on an incitement to religious hatred charge.
And just while we're talking about that instance which happened in Manchester, it was a disgraceful response by the Greater Manchester Police, because not only did they publish his name, they published his address as well. So there is this sense that not only are you in danger of going to prison, let's be honest, you're made a target here by the very authorities who are supposed to be protecting you.
And we have a blasphemy law. I mean, what you just proven that we have a blasphemy law already in place, albeit not passed by Parliament. You know, the fact that you have, cinemas will gladly pull down films if there are protests outside there. The fact that this chap outrageously was arrested for burning a book. Now, look, I detest the burning of books as a matter of principle. I also don't think it's very wise to burn holy scriptures and so forth. But I will defend to the death the right of anyone to do that. And in fact, when you see things like this, when you see somebody arrested simply for burning their own property, something that they own, that behooves us all to actually have one of those I Spartacus moments, And I just remember the cowardice of the British press after the Charlie Hebdo massacre, when of course some brave European publications and American ones reprinted the image of Muhammad from the cartoon of Charlie Hebdo, and the British press cowardly refused to do so. I sort of think this may be along those similar lines. I think, I'm not necessarily encouraging other people to start burning Qurans, but I do think that there needs to be some sort of gesture made to say this is absolutely unacceptable, and you should not be arrested for and charged with what he was charged with.
Especially in the context of our culture, I can think of several instances in terms of the arts in which Christianity is completely blasphemous treatments of Christianity. The Last Temptation of Christ, for example, is one, a film that's well over 20 years old now, I think. But also the work of art, I think it was called Piss Christ.
Yes.
Yeah,
Hans Kuhn.
Yeah, and so
and the Book of Mormon, Life of Brian.
There are so many examples, and yet we have to take there's a very specific reason why we have to take one particular religion and treat it differently. And that is, I come back down to the original point, is that's because many people are frightened of it, and with good reason.
But you'll remember just a few months ago, even last month, Muslim MPs stood up in the House of Commons during PMQs and asked the Prime Minister if he would outlaw the burning of the Quran. Keir Starmer deflected, refused to commit. But he didn't need to outlaw it because the fact is we're already having that situation in this country already.
Yeah, I do wonder how aware people are of what is coming down the line. I mean, you said you wouldn't want to encourage people to burn the Quran. In a way, I was kind of hoping more people would, in a kind of a Spartacus moment, because this is our freedom at stake in this country. And I do think of how far a line is this in the sand? These are Islamophobia laws. At what point will people say enough is enough? And I don't know if that time is coming. What do you think, Harrison?
Well, it's interesting. Ayaan Hirsi Ali in 2015, after the Charlie Hebdo affairs, wrote a piece, I think it was in the Wall Street Journal, it may have been elsewhere, saying we need to spread the risk around. Because if it's only one person, only one magazine, or only one individual, only one organization that is willing to stand up for free speech, it becomes very easy to pick those people off. And we're talking about here violently, but also think about it in legal terms. Do you remember when they tried to pass a transphobia law north of Hadrian's Wall when Humza Yousaf was still First Minister of Scotland, and J.K. Rowling very courageously, she sort of dared the authorities to act on this new law and to imprison her, got loads and loads of people to do it, and I think they got something insane like 10,000 complaints in a day, which obviously overwhelms the legal system. Hopefully a similar thing could happen here if people are just going to, as Peter Whittle said on GB News with, again, I agree with Rafe, I'm not in favour of burning books, and I know that you're not really either, but it's just, but as Peter Whittle said on GB News, I will not abide, if it does become a law, and Toby Young is wrong, that it's not just issued as guidance, not abiding by this law, if we sort of collectively refuse to do so, a mass act of civil disobedience, the authorities wouldn't really be very well positioned to deal with that. So absolutely, as a matter of solidarity with the principle of free speech and on standing against the insidious incursion of blasphemy laws into our country, yes, we should refuse to abide by this law if it is passed as a law.
But I think also, I think also anybody who is charged with one of these things, whether it be the sort of people at in the Southport protests who were arrested, this chap with the Quran, who are clearly being pressured to plead guilty. I still have faith in the great British jury system. And if these things do go, I don't think someone like this person would have actually been convicted. And I think people need to feel reassured that, they don't have to go along with what they're pressured to do. And that actually British justice is still fair and just if you rely upon 12 men, honest and true.
But I do think we need to keep a close eye on this Islamophobia definition, because as I understand it, it doesn't just mean criticism of Islam. It could just mean like historically kind of representing accurate truths about Islam, about the history, about invasions, about
the Prophet,
about certain things in the Quran, and also, we've obviously seen a lot of media attention on the grooming gangs, and I know that connecting that to Islam or Pakistani men or Muslim men, that even that might be included in the definition. So you do wonder what it means for us as media outlets going forward. But anyway, sorry, depressing and demoralising stuff in this country. But on a more positive, optimistic note, looking over to the US, Trump has only been in power for several weeks now, but we are seeing so much being done over in America in terms of executive orders. And Rafe, do you want to talk about some?
I think this should be me. Yeah, don't worry. I'll do my best, because I think his whole strategy has been very successful in that he's gone for an overwhelming scattershot approach, which is clearly overwhelmed the media. If you would look at the New York Times, they're constantly struggling to keep pace with all the things that he's doing, and I think this is partly deliberate. There is method in the madness, so to speak, but it's all generally very good stuff. He's passed all sorts of executive orders, drill baby drill. He's passed. Should I just select the ones that I think of, because there are so many? I'm overwhelmed too. The executive order that I'm the biggest fan of is his executive order banning birthright citizenship. So after the Civil War, the 14th Amendment was passed, which basically was designed to make sure that newly liberated African-American slaves weren't effectively stateless, but having become free men. And this is obviously a good thing to have done, and they did it in the 1860s. But in the 1890s, there was a test case where, and I can't remember all the details around the test case, but there was I think he was a Chinese immigrant trying to claim that because he'd been born on American soil, he counted for American citizenship. And the Supreme Court ruled in favor of him. And ever since then, I think it's 1898 when that happened, birthright citizenship has just been a sort of de facto stare decisis, de jure stare decisis matter of American law. And Trump has issued an executive order against that. Now, that sounds good in and of itself. What this is really going to do in practice is this is going to go through the courts. And this is a court, bear in mind, think about Roe versus Wade, think about certain other decisions they made. They're very happy there's a conservative majority in the Supreme Court, and they're very happy to overthrow long-standing precedent if they believe that there is an originalist, textualist legal case to do so. And I think that there is in this case. I won't bore people with all the reasons why I think that, but I think it's highly likely that they will not only back up Trump's executive order ban on birthright citizenship, which basically, I should say, this basically allows, say, a Guatemalan woman to get herself within the interior of the United States while pregnant, have a baby, and then all of a sudden that baby is classed as an American citizen, and under the 1965 Immigration Act, because one of the key principles of the 1965 American Immigration Act was to promote family unification. All of a sudden, that baby serves as a kind of anchor. That's why they call them anchor babies, for the whole family, the whole cousin network, and everyone else to come into the country. And it's really, really good that he's ended this. It should have ended a while ago. And I think if the Supreme Court reinforced him with a decision overturning existing precedent, America will go from a just soli country, which means if you're born from the soil, you're a citizen, to a just sanguinis country. In other words, you need to have at least one parent. This is what Thatcher did, I believe, in our country in 1983. You have to have one parent who is a citizen in order to be eligible for citizenship yourself. So this is a very good thing that Trump has done. All sorts of other things around, exactly the sort of hot button cultural issues that we care about. You can even mention the trans one.
Yeah, which is the one that really resonates, I think. And this image, a bit of footage where he's signing this executive order, which is banning all of this trans craziness in schools, but also in sports as well. And all of these children around him, it's just genius social media, He's enjoying it so much, and everything is working for him because, in a way, because to use their expression, he's on the right side of history. So all of this stuff is happening, and of course they've got 2028 is the LA Olympic Games, so we'll be able to put all of this stuff into practice. He won't have men in women's sports. Just one kind of, I suppose, note of caution with this for me is, and I suppose it's my background as an academic, we mustn't be complacent on this. It feels like we're slaying the dragon, but by God, the dragon is not dead. And I think back to the late 90s, early 2000s, when I was first reading peer-reviewed articles on gender and transness, and I was thinking, this is just so philosophically, this is just so crazy. It's never gonna fly, other than within the crazy walls of academia. So they were saying that gender is performative, or it's a social construct, while simultaneously saying it's at your core and you have a gendered soul. They were trying to make all of these ridiculous claims, and I just thought to myself at the time, well, let the feminists deal with that and sort it all out. But of course, most of the feminists got on board with it, and it burgeoned and burgeoned and burgeoned. So I suppose what I'm trying to say is this is a mind virus. This won't go away completely because huge swathes of people in the institutions really don't want it to go away. So we're seeing something wonderful in the States. I'm hoping and praying that it's going to come over here. I think it is doing. It's, the winds of change are coming here, but we really need to push, and we cannot be complacent about this. But brilliant on Donald Trump and his administration for pushing this forward in schools and in sport.
We're already seeing the first ripples of the tsunami coming over the Atlantic because, of course, now we have city corporations saying that they're going to be abandoning DEI. So for people are being emboldened now, which is waiting to see reform hopefully take up a lot of that, momentum as well. Look, I agree with you, but as Elon Musk said the other day, he said, this is the only chance to have a revolution. If it's not going to happen now, it'll never happen. This is the very best chance. And that includes reforming the education system, right? In fact, perhaps getting rid of the Federal Department of Education.
He's going to be doing that.
Yeah, altogether.
Yeah.
And you can see the results in the public service in America. Yesterday on the State Department for a few hours, somebody flew the American flag upside down as a sign of distress. You can see that they're shaking in their boots and in there. I think he's played an absolute blinder when it comes to the domestic policies, on the government efficiency, on immigration, on the trans issues and all the rest of that. I think it's superb. If I could be sort of a constructive critic as a friend, internationally, I'm a bit more wary by some of the things that he's done and said, which don't seem to have had as much forethought or as much preparation as perhaps we'd like. I mean, I was when with Colombia, when the Colombian president refused to accept that plane load and Trump threatened him with tariffs, I thought this is fantastic. Likewise with Mexico, live up to your duties with those tariffs for fentanyl, for securing your border, but then to do the same thing against Canada.
And you, Rafe.
I just feel that there was just no justification for it. A great, strong ally with a great, strong conservative leader in the wings, ready to come into power. And so many Trump supporters in Canada have felt betrayed and alienated by this because the justification for it simply wasn't there. 96% of the fentanyl coming into America comes from Mexico. Only 0.2% came. 40 pounds came in from Canada to America, compared to 800 pounds that went from America into Canada. I think only 2 million immigrants came up the southern border. Only 18,000 came south from the northern border. And 28,000 Americans went up, and 30,000 illegal guns have gone in. So all the justification for that wasn't there. And it's almost as if he's using a sledgehammer to crack a nutshell. And all the concessions he got, apart from having a fentanyl czar in Canada, all of the other concessions had already been agreed long before. Yeah. And you sort of thought, well, what is the point? Because now suddenly within Canada, there's so much anti-American sentiment now, and people want to refashion the economy so it's not reliant on the Americans. They don't even have a trade surplus with America if you take out the cheaply sold oil it gives there. So I thought that was really unnecessary, just as with Denmark. Denmark is a role model for us in Europe and the West and how you deal with immigration, how you deal with integration. Yeah. They are our anti-woke friends. And so for Trump to make these statements about Greenland, you can justify it geopolitically to tell the Russians, hands off the North, and to tell the Chinese, hands off Panama. This is like a new Monroe doctrine, This is my continent, get away from it. But I think to alienate some of your best allies the way he's done, I'm not entirely convinced by, and we're going to see what happens after 30 days when the tariffs get reviewed again. And also there's the issue of why China only got 10% tariffs as opposed to 25%. And then you got something like Gaza, which we've just had today. He's just, having had his staff backtrack on the whole idea of giving Gaza to the Americans, today he's doubled down on it. There's a fine line between genius and insanity. I think that there's actually potential for this to be a genius move, because clearly a two-state solution is not going to be happening in our lifetimes, I think, and if it is a concentration camp, as people like Owen Jones like to tell us, surely having lovely new homes built for you elsewhere is a great thing. And I was just thinking, there are 2 million, Trump hasn't said this, but there are 2 million people in Gaza. That would mean about 500,000 families. If each one of them was given $500,000 to leave, that's a life-changing sum. They spent $2 trillion in Iraq. It would only cost $250 billion to solve the Gaza crisis. But of course, life's not that simple, and I fear he may be viewing it as if it's just simply a property deal, and there's a lot more issues going on religiously and psychologically.
Well, as we were saying, weren't we, Harris? The people who are relocated, let's say, to Jordan, or they're not going to stay there. They're going to end up here, aren't they? That's essentially what's going to happen, I think.
Oh yes, can I add a bit on that? In this is another. We're talking about obviously it not being in the interests of Canada and Denmark to have these. Well, in the case of Denmark to have to be bad mouthed in public, and in the case of Canada to have punitive tariffs slapped on them. I think it's likely that look. The Jordanians and the Egyptians have long expressed serious skepticism and indeed adamantine will in not wanting to bring the Palestinians into their territories. I understand why they want to do it, because they don't think that the Palestinians are going to be assimilable. And I can assure you, if they're not assimilable into culturally proximate fellow Muslim, Arab, Jordan and Egypt, they're not going to be assimilable here. But because the Jordanians have an acute sense of their national interest, the Saudis have an acute sense of their national interest, the Egyptians have an acute sense of their national interest. These are whatever you might think about them, these are kind of self-respecting nations. Europe is in a cultural morass at the moment. These people are going to end up, if this goes goes through
in Europe.
being saddled onto us, and that is not in our interests. And I think that's worth saying. Although I will admit to having a bit more Schadenfreude about what's been going on to the Canadians than you do, Rafe. I understand all the points you're making, but I do think this is sort of if you're going to try and construct a post-national nation, which is Trudeau's own way of talking about things, and I even think that Pierre Poilievre talks about Canada in this way. He's on record addressing the Sikh community in Canada, saying, if you vote for me, and because they've had huge levels of immigration from the Punjab, and there's a big kind of Sikh community interest in Canada now. Very nice people, but they think of themselves as Sikh. They're quite tribal in the way that they understand themselves. He said to them, if you vote for me, I will make sure that there are more regular direct flights between Toronto and Amritsar. Is that in the interest of the Canadian people? So both sides of the political spectrum in Canada are fundamentally post-national in how they understand Canadian identity. And so it's going to be very difficult to tap into Canadian nationalism in order to fight a trade war, having emptied Canada of any kind of unifying, binding national spirit. So I think they're going to have serious trouble mobilizing the kind of solidarity that they'll need if they're going to take on America.
The evidence just shows the opposite, actually, that what Trump's done is for the first time healed the divide between there, and you're now seeing it revive Canadian nationalism. So in effect has actually helped try to solve that. But I think it's about unfair to have Schadenfreude against the government when it's the people
I agree with that.
suffering. It's almost as if after 13 years of Tony Blair, or right now with Starmer, we were being punished. The British people were being punished because of having Starmer in power.
I was talking about the political elites, not the people. I like Canadian people. I used to co-host a show and be programmed with one. It did indeed.
I mean, coming back to the UK then, I mean, I guess the closest we've got to a kind of MAGA movement here would be the rise of Reform. And there's been some very interesting polling coming out, Rafe, about Reform and how popular they are actually. Yeah.
MAGA light. Yes. So for the first time now, we have Reform topping the polls, leading not only the Tories, but now also leading the incumbent Labour Party. So the last poll shows that Reform is on 25%, whereas Labour, which is, a quarter of the voting public, versus 23% for Labour and only 21% for the Tories. And it's quite fascinating to see how this has happened, because what Reform has done is essentially hive off votes from the Labour Party and from the Tory Party, but fascinatingly is also sucking up many of those people who didn't vote in 2024, and that's been huge. 3 million people who didn't vote in 2024 have come over to the Reform Party. It's also fascinating to see, of course, many people in the Tory Party, you will remember during the prime ministerial elections, said, oh, no, we mustn't lean towards Reform. We must try to get those Lib Dem voters back. Well, actually, we know from the evidence now
there are actually Lib Dem voters. 14%.
Only 180,000 Tory voters have switched to the Lib Dems, whereas 1.2 million have gone to Reform. So all of those politicians haven't got a clue what they're talking about.
It'd be funny you mentioned that. I remember during the leadership election, Tom Tugendhat started sort of pitching to the members saying, by the way, guys, don't forget, I'm winning with Lib Dems in West England. No one cares about that.
And that we defeat lies. And it's fascinating because, for many years, look, Labour won the last election with only 33% of the vote. With 1/3 of the vote, they got a stonking majority, and 1/3 gave them 2/3 of the seats in Parliament. In fact, since the Second World War, no governing party has won more than 50% of the vote. You only need to have just over 1/3 or so to win that. And Reform is now at 25. Now, we spoke with Rupert Lowe and Nigel in the late last year, and they were confident about forming the next government. We thought, well, that's very optimistic, but it actually is something that's within the bounds of reason. We used to say, oh, well, look, 60% of the country votes left, but they're split between SNP, Greens, Lib Dem, Plaid Cymru and Labour. On the right, we only have Tory governments because the 40% who vote right-wing only have one party. And we thought there cannot be a split between Tory and Reform. Actually, there can be, because of the Labour vote coming over and those people who don't vote for the Tory party. There's actually a third path, and Reform is capitalising on that. So we might we might want them to be more radical, more right-wing, more conservative, but what they're doing is clearly working for them. The question is, if they get into power, or when they get into power, will they actually then enforce the policies that we want to see done in the same way that Tony Blair and Keir Starmer came in on a very moderate ticket and then became much more radical when they were in power?
Yeah, I think it's clear that they are the centre of the realignment. And the key thing that you said there, Rafe, which is absolutely correct, is that they are mobilising people who are dormant, who do not vote. That's massive. Okay, that's one thing. The Labour Party are doing all their work for them. We've said this before on this show, but they're so incredibly bad. It's kind of joyous to watch. It's a beautiful thing to see the Labour Party floundering around and doing all of these crazily stupid things. It's like, Angela Rayner dealing with Islam, as we were saying before. It's like having a chimpanzee driving a bus the wrong way down the M1. It's that catastrophic. So they've got it all to play for, but still they're incredibly new. Again, we were talking about the SDP and Reform in the same breath just not very long ago. They're a brand new party. It's amazing that they're above the government at the moment in the opinion polls. I don't want them to crash and burn. Okay, I don't want them to crash and burn, and I want them to be much more focused on their policies. I want more detail. I want to know what's happening in terms of Islamism. I want to know what's happening in terms of business, the economy, education, and the culture. It's kind of there in embryo, but every now and again, Nigel in particular will say something which is incredibly alarming, which goes against the grain of everything else they're doing. So I just want that sense of security. And I know I'm not going to get it yet because they're so young and immature, I suppose, is probably the best word as a party. But as you say, they are the only game in town. We need to be behind them and we need to give them all the help we can.
We're obviously a long way off the general election, and political campaigning is very much a marathon rather than a sprint. What do you think Harris and Reform need to do kind of between now and the next general election to keep up the momentum and to have a genuine, shot at the election?
I think more of the same. I have my criticisms of Reform, which I've made clear on deprogrammed and elsewhere in the past, but as a sort of purely pragmatic matter of they are climbing in the polls, and the figures speak for themselves, and I expect they're going to soar more and more as Kemi Badenoch's pathetic leadership becomes more and more evident to people, and Starmer's frankly borderline treacherous leadership becomes more and more obvious to people. I just think they are going to enjoy this kind of special status as, well, you're better than those two, and that's going to be and Farage can lean into that. And one thing that they benefit from the moment is they still are fundamentally a kind of populist pressure campaign. And one of the useful things about being a populist is that you have this underdog status, which gives you a kind of which has an exhilarating quality about it for you yourself, but it also makes you quite attractive to people as a whole, because you pit yourself against the establishment, and it's never popular to be the establishment. So you have that kind of momentum there. And the other good thing about being populist is that you actually have no responsibility, because you're not in government, you're not in office, you can purely campaign in poetry without having to worry about governing in prose. So my only hope is that we are not disappointed. I think it would be a complete waste of time for Reform to win the next election, which I agree with Rafe. They could, because our system thrives on preference cascades. And if people see the Tory party sinking and Reform rising, it's like a dance floor. When one person starts dancing on a dance floor, and all of a sudden, at first it's a bit nerve-wracking to go on a dance floor because there's no one there. But if one or two or three people there, all of a sudden everyone's on the dance floor. I think something like that could happen. But I think that they need to make sure that they're planning meticulously for any government they might form in the next 5 years, because if they don't, then there's just going to be more and more disappointment.
Well, it seems as though they already are acting as a pressure group. I mean, Kemi Badenoch made a policy announcement, which she said she wasn't going to do for 2 years, but she did make a policy announcement this week about immigration, which is obviously Reform's key topic. Many people feel that she did this because of the rise of Reform. Her policy announcement was rather weak. It was about sort of deporting people that are here on low-skilled work, and it was quite complicated. A lot of people said it wasn't very thought through. But they are already acting as a pressure group, Rafe. What do you think?
Yes, well, as Dr. Johnson said, when a man knows he's going to be hanged in a fortnight, it concentrates the mind wonderfully. So Kemi Badenoch can see that gallows being erected right now with, 25%. And but as you say, she still can't bring herself to go where it's necessary to go. If there were a generic there, of course, he would be outflanking Farage and Reform more or less.
And who is shouting from the sidelines?
Who is, but has been doing a terrific job shouting from the sidelines, just essentially almost reminding people of what they could have got if they had voted for him. It's funny. I almost sort of think that people say Rupert Lowe is actually where the voters are Nigel Farage needs to be more like Rupert Lowe. I sort of think that they make a good double act, because most people in this country aren't where we are and where our viewers are. Most people are still not completely aware of the scale of the issues we face from Islam, immigration and so forth. It's lamentable, but that's the case. They all know who Nigel Farage is, so he's speaking very much to them. Rupert Lowe is very little. No one knows Rupert Lowe in the broader population, but our people know him, and he's speaking to them. So we feel satisfied there's someone fighting our corner. Nigel Farage has got more of the national view, and I sort of think that's perhaps by design as much as it is by personal character.
And probably as well, I think you're right there. I think the best person to speak to the red wall seats, which are going to be massively important for reform, is Nigel Farage. And I really hope that in by-elections and over the next few years that presence, especially in the north, around the northern cities, those mill towns in particular, I hope reform are there, and I hope they're there to stay.
I agree that they're a good double act, if I may just say. I think and it goes back to the populism point, one of the shortcomings with populism is that sometimes it's satisfied just to meet the people where they are and elevate them over public opinion. Whereas I think true leadership consists not in just meeting the people where they are, but taking them somewhere else and like reshaping both popular opinion and public opinion. And if you're a true leader, you show that kind of resolve. And I think Farage, particularly given the current electoral volatility in our system, which probably hasn't been this volatile since maybe the 1910s, 1920s, in terms of people willing to shift their political loyalties very, very quickly. Matt Goodwin talks about how we're in a kind of unprecedented moment of electoral and political volatility in this country, huge amount of cultural ferment, huge amount of dissatisfaction. This is the time when leaders do emerge, and they can take people who maybe 5 years ago, we've already seen it a little bit with sort of crunchy granola mums voting for Trump. I mean, these were people who probably couldn't have seen themselves voting for Trump in, say, 2016. But then COVID happens, they become very suspicious about things, they fall in love with RFK, all of a sudden they find themselves voting for Trump in 2024. People's loyalties can shift quickly, and reform, while being mindful not to alienate people by being too brash, shouldn't underestimate their ability to shape public opinion, not just to meet it where it is.
Because I think, sorry, Amy, but when we talk about a realignment, that really is what's happening. It's a paradigm shift. So we are the uni party, Labour and Conservative, are falling away. And if reform fill the void, that will be good, wonderful, and interesting. But what else is going to fill the void there? And what else is going to happen? And what is that political landscape going to look like? Things are moving so incredibly fast. We wouldn't have been talking like this 18 months ago. What's that political landscape going to look like post 2026, 27, heading towards that general election? That's what we've got to think about. And it's not just reform, it's who they're going to be up against. Because at the moment, I'm not really sure. To me, it does seem absolutely extraordinary that in less than a year, a very small party is now topping the polls. I don't think you could have anticipated that or predicted it. And I think it's all good stuff. It's really positive. And, all the things that we talk about, it's very easy to get doom and gloom, but it does show that people do care about the issues that we talk about, because how else can you explain this rise in their popularity? But anyway, only time will tell, and we'll be charting it on Newspeak in the weeks and months ahead. So that's all for today on Newspeak. But if you are a member, do join us for our extra content where we'll be looking at the anniversary of Brexit.
Hello. If you're enjoying the New Culture Forum channel and you believe in our mission, may I invite you to join our membership scheme at the link below or on our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Our work is more important now than ever, and we have great plans ahead for the future, but we can't do it without your support. From as little as £3 per month, you can help ensure that we continue on our mission. As a member, you'll receive a range of benefits, including access to exclusive content, invitations to our private events, including here at our studios, free copies of our books, and much, much more, including, of course, our famous NCF mug. If you aren't able to become a member, then please help us by clicking this button and subscribing to our channel. It's completely free. Just remember to also click the bell icon so that you can get notifications when we post new videos. Thank you.
you.